Okay, so in this lecture, I want to talk about fair betting rates. And this is something that I think is interesting in its own right. Like a lot of stuff, like if you gamble, well, it's interesting because of that. There's some other stuff about what are and aren't good choices that this gets into. So let's just consider suppose I offer you a bet. Let's say I offer you, I'll flip a coin, and if you win, you can call it in the air. And if you win, you get $10. What's the most you should pay to play the game? Or if I offer you a certain amount, should you take it or not? If I say, all right, well, pay me $4 to play, should you do that or not? Well, one thing you might say, if the expected payout is negative, don't do it. If it's positive, jump at it. If it's zero, take it or leave it. It's up to you. And you might be, okay, well, what's the expected payout, right? I mean, it pays out $10, but that only happens half the time. Well, that probably gives you some idea of what the formula might be, right? So expected payout is the prize times the odds of winning minus the cost you pay to play. Let's say the cost was $4. Then 10 times 1/2 equals 5 minus 4, $1. The expected payout is $1. Well, 1 is a positive number. The bet pays out more than not. You should take the bet. This line of reasoning says. Now, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. We'll come to that. If you absolutely need that $10 for something else and can't afford to lose it, maybe you shouldn't. If you've got $100 in your wallet and you just wouldn't mind a little game that you have a good chance of winning, then you should. But, that's the reasoning here. We'll talk about how good or bad this reasoning is in different contexts. But here's a little bit of jargon. When the expected payout equals 0, then the bet is fair. My little coin flipping game, what would make the bet fair there? What would the bet have to be fair? Well, $5, right? 10 times 1/2 equals 5. If the cost was 5, then we'd get 0. That's a fair bet. Well, what's the reasoning here? Why do we call this a fair bet? Why do we, it's simple math, right? It's not complicated. It's a neat, simple way to do this. Why do we reason in these terms? Well, imagine what would happen if we played this dumb little game for an infinite amount of time. All right, it'd be boring, right? But if we did it for an infinitely long time, you would break even or very close to it if the betting rate was fair. You might go on runs where you win 5 times in a row, but if you do it long enough, it would all balance out and, you'd have runs where you didn't or just enough where you didn't. Do it long enough, you'll end up back at 0 if it is a fair bet. In a fair game, neither person or none of the people, there might be more than one person, if it's fair, then nobody in the long term is going to make or lose money. On the other hand, if you paid $5.05 to play, then our expected payout would be negative. It would be negative 5 cents, 1 nickel. Doesn't seem like much. But if you play long enough, you will lose every cent you had, even if it's just quote unquote unfair by that amount of 5 cents. On the other hand, if you only paid $4.95 to play, then if we play long enough, you would bankrupt me, right? Eventually, I would lose all my money. Like, this wouldn't be a good way to make any money because it'd take forever, right? But the idea is if you did it long enough, you would take all my money. Well, now look. When we talk about fair here, fair is a technical term, right? Fair betting rate means one where if we do it long enough, neither person makes money. Casinos make money because the bets they offer are never fair. Your expected payout, what you win times the odds of winning are always less than the amount you pay to play. Might not be by much, when you do the math and you put $1 or whatever in the slot machine, it might be negative by only, I don't really know, I haven't researched this, but it might be negative only by like 15, 20, 30 cents. But if you have hundreds of people every hour playing all day, losing even just a little bit of money, on average, you're going to make a lot of money, right? None of the games at the casino are fair. If you play at a casino long enough, you will go broke. This is especially true of the games that don't involve any skill, the fully random ones, roulette, craps, slot machines, things like that, right? Games like cards that have some skill involved, they're different, but, as we talked about in class, casinos tend to kick out anybody who's too good at playing cards, right? The odds are always in their favor. In the long term, anyone who gambles in a casino long enough will go bankrupt. Because if they let you play long enough, they know that you will lose money. If you're making money off of them, they will eventually kick you out, right? All right. So here's a little more interesting, a bit more strictly philosophical question. Should you take any bet that is unfair in your favor? Should you take any bet that has a positive payout? And on the other side of it, should you refuse any bet that's unfair against you? If the bet has a negative payout for you, should you always turn it down? Think about that for a second. Let me give you just one example. Suppose you have to pay $10,000 to play the following game, and we're only going to play it once. You roll 2 20-sided dice, and if it comes up 40, you win. Remember I said there are always dice with different numbers of sides. 20-sided dice look a little bit like golf balls. You roll them. Well, if both of them come up on the 20, you win $5 million. Life-changing amount of money, right? Should you play this game? Well, one way of saying this is what's the expected payout. Prize odds of winning. First step, well, that's 5 million divided by 400. 1 in 20, 1 in 20. That a die comes up 20. They're independent. We multiply. Well, 5 million divided by 400 equals 12,500. Remember, we pay 10,000 to play. Our expected payout's 2,500. Pretty decent, right? Should you play this game? I sure as heck wouldn't if it were offered to me, right? Even though the payout is positive. Well, why wouldn't you play? I'm guessing some of you might, but most of you, I'm going to guess, wouldn't. And why not? Well, because even though if you win, you get a life-changing amount of money, if you lose, that is probably, for most people listening to this, if you even have that kind of money to do the bet, it's probably a good part of your savings, maybe even close to all of it, right? And what are the odds you lose that money? 399 out of 400. It is very, very, very likely that you lose this game. If you were allowed to play it infinitely long and you had enough money to play it infinitely long, then, of course, do it, right? But if you only have enough money to play once or it's only offered once, I'm not sure you should do it. Incidentally, this is one of those ways that the rich get richer. When the rich, people who have a lot of money, see investment opportunities like this, very risky, very likely to lose their money, but they'll make a lot of money if they take them, they can afford to do that. People who don't have as much money can't, right? I think of Mitt Romney here. Mitt Romney is a very smart person. I wouldn't deny that. But one of the ways that Mitt Romney got so rich is, well, he started rich. He was smart enough to see what were good investments, but he was also rich enough that he could take the risk that somebody as smart as Mitt Romney, who is not as rich as he is, couldn't take, right? So in the real world, maybe not, it's not casino gambling, but maybe investments. If I saw a really, really good, really, really risky investment, I'm not smart enough to do that. But if I did, I couldn't necessarily take it because I might not be able to afford losing the money. Somebody who's a lot better off than I am could. Anyway, another point though, the other side of this. So the bets offered by casinos, bookies, and lotteries are never fair, right? You might, if you're betting with a friend about a game or even just playing cards or whatever, that might be, probably will be fair, right? But bets offered by casinos, lotteries, bookies, those are never fair. Why are they never fair? Because if they were, they couldn't make money. It's possible the bookie or whoever will make a mistake, but assuming they don't make a mistake, and they usually don't, because if they do, they don't stay in business very long, they're not going to offer you a fair bet. The Virginia lottery, no lottery in existence, a fair bet. Whether you buy scratch-offs, pick whatever, mega ball, I don't know the names of all the lotteries, right? But it's never fair because the state wants to make money. If they gave you a fair bet, they would lose money because they'd break even on the lottery itself and then have to spend all that money to administer it, right? They are not going to offer you a fair bet. Well, does that mean that anybody who plays the lottery, bets in a casino, or makes a sports bet is stupid? Am I saying that you should never gamble, that it is dumb to gamble? No, not at all, right? And the reason is you might care about something besides money. I mean, you almost certainly care about money, but it might not be, it probably isn't the only thing you care about, right? When my wife and I are traveling, well, often, like I said, she likes to gamble more than I do. But when we're traveling, we'll often stop at a rest stop. Not a rest stop, I mean a gas station, get some gas. We'll usually buy some scratch-off lottery tickets. Why? Because if you're driving a very long way, you're probably bored. It's a nice little break. It's fun to see if you win some money, right? Sometimes we win, usually we don't. On the whole, we have lost more money playing this than we've won, but on the whole, I think it's probably been a decent enough investment because it's kind of a fun thing. It breaks the boredom, you know. Or, I've not really done this very much. I think I've only betted on like games like 2 or 3 times in my life. Maybe not even, maybe only once. I do remember betting against my high school football team because they were absolutely terrible, one of the worst in our part of the state. Those idiots won a game finally, and I ended up losing $10. It's the only time I remember betting on a sports game. Actually, it was a pretty good bet. I mean, for Carroll County High School to lose, I don't know. I think you should always bet on that, but they won that one time, right? But look, you might bet on a sports game, and you might do it because, like, well, if you watch and you got money riding on it, the game goes from being maybe kind of sort of interesting to really interesting, right? Might be a perfectly good reason to bet, right? Or you've got $20 and some time to kill, go to the casino, put it in the slot machines, right? So what I'm saying is it might be rational to gamble because you enjoy it even if the expected payout is negative. And even if the expected payout is positive, you might not want to make the bet because you might not be able to afford to, you know. So I think a lot of people will act like this stuff with expected payouts is a sort of gold standard, way to reason about things, that you're irrational if you don't. I don't think that's true. It's useful sometimes, right? If you're gambling, if you're making investments and you see those as gambling over time and you can do a lot of them, this is pretty useful. Gensler talks about thinking in these terms when he buys plane tickets. But I think this is, even though it's interesting, even though you will hear people talk about it, it's a fairly limited use in real life. There are some Silicon Valley types who think that this is how you should reason. I am not so convinced. Not to play dirty, but just to give you one reason, one of the people I know of who is absolutely convinced that this is the way human beings should reason is Sam Bankman-Fried. If you don't know who Sam Bankman-Fried is, Google that name and some things will pop up. All right. Sam Bankman-Fried's way of reasoning did not end well for Sam Bankman-Fried. All right, so that's all I want to say about fair bets. Interesting topic, a little bit limited in its use, maybe.